There's a large, increasing number of dark-skinned people swelling the dark population of France and Britain, and it's giving them a great deal of cause for worry. No effort has been made to unite the Afro-American community or the American Negro community with the West Indian community, and then those two communities with the African community, and those communities with the Asian community. This has never been done. And this frightens many interests in this country. Many people in this country who want to see us the minority and who don't want to see us taking too militant or too uncompromising a stand are absolutely against the successful regrouping or organizing of any faction in this country whose thought and whose thinking pattern is international rather than national. I, for one, disassociate myself from the movement completely, and I dedicate myself to the organizing of black people into a group that are interested in doing things constructive, not for just one religious segment of the community, but for the entire black community.
One of the things that's going to help to bring this about is the independence of Africa. And one of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it.
We didn't want anybody to tell us anything about Africa, much less call us an African. And in hating Africa and hating the African, we ended up even hating ourselves without even realizing it. Because you can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree. You can't hate your origin and not end up hating yourself. You can't hate Africa and not hate yourself. And you show me one of these people over here who have been thoroughly brainwashed, who has a negative attitude toward Africa, and I'll show you one that has a negative attitude toward himself.
But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is. We begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride.
Ramadan Mubarak. My name is Shamtoli Haq. I'm the editor of Law at the Margins. For those of you who are not familiar with Law at the Margins, we're a collaborative social justice platform that aims to lift up the voices and perspective of those who are marginalized, with a particular focus on how law impacts communities. I'm thrilled to collaborate with community movement builders and Afrosocialists of DSA on this anniversary of Malcolm X. I want to give a thanks to Kamal Franklin, who reached out as a co-creator of this evening. So before I hand it over to Dr. Prosper, who will facilitate the discussion and introduce our guests, just to let you know that this broadcast is being shown on both the Facebook pages of Law at the Margins, as well as Community Movement Builders, as well as the Instagram of Community Movement Builders. Please comment, post your questions. I'm going to hop off and listen to the conversation and also follow the comments. After the discussion, we will take your comments and questions and pose it to our guests. Again, I am so delighted and excited for this conversation, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Prosper to introduce our guests and to set the frame for our discussion. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you, Shamtoli, for the introduction. My name is Mamyrah Prosper. I am a professor of Africana Studies. I am the coordinator of the Pan-African Solidarity Network with Community Movement Builders. Tonight, I will serve as a moderator for what I hope will be a lively and timely discussion. But before we jump into it, I want to invite you to take part in a moment of silence to remember Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tiffany Mofield, and Nina Pop, to name a few of the most recent young Black victims of violence and terror here in the United States. Thank you. This event was created first and foremost to recognize and celebrate the birthday of a great militant, Malcolm X, who continues to inspire us in the 21st century. So we envisioned this event as an opportunity to explore Malcolm's revolutionary politics during his time, but also to compare the material conditions that shaped him at the time and the material conditions, right, that we experience and we're living today. And as well to study the ways in which Malcolm's theory has been applied both domestically and internationally. And so with that, I would like to introduce our panelists for tonight in the order in which they will speak. First, we will have Jared Ball. Jared A. Ball is a father and husband. After that, he is a professor of communication studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, and is a founder and curator of imixwhatilike.org, a multimedia hub of emancipatory journalism and revolutionary beat reporting. Ball is also author of the recently published The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, for which there is a May 25th virtual book launch party. Everyone is more than welcome to sign up for at imixwhatilike.org. Our second speaker will be Jonathan Ellis. And Jonathan is an activist born and raised in the city of Atlanta. He has a bachelor's degree in history and believes that socialism is the cure to the planet's ill. He is a member of Community Movement Builders and Metro Atlanta Democratic Socialists of America. Do we have Jonathan with us? I hope he can join us soon. Third in line will be Yusef Bunchy Shakur, who is well-versed in the language and syntax of Detroit as an author, educator, and neighborhood organizer. Yusef epitomizes redemption from the many lessons he learned from his father, whom he met in prison for the first time. As a Black organic intellectual, unorthodox leader, and father, he has demonstrated his commitment to the revolutionary principles of social justice as activist and organizer to enhance the lives of Black people and other oppressed people through his works of restoring the neighbor back to the hood. He currently serves as co-director of programs with the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion and earned his master's in social work from the University of Michigan School of Social Work in 2019. He has been featured in many newspaper articles, TV interviews, and radio shows talking about his transformation, redemption, ideas, and organizing efforts. He has also received numerous awards and received the Michigan Chronicle Men of Excellence Award in 2019. Our last speaker will be Shaheen Rana, and she is a community psychologist by training and has worked as a program evaluator and researcher in the mental health, public health, and education fields. And her expertise is in culturally responsive research and evaluation. She is the co-chair of the Afrosocialist, Socialists of Color Caucus, and the Socialist Feminist Caucus of Metro Atlanta chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. Currently, she is also engaged in mutual aid efforts with Food for Life Atlanta. So welcome and thank you to all the panelists for joining us. After you have intervened, we will open up the floor to the audience for questions. And so for now, I cede the mic to Jared.
Thank you very much. Peace, everybody. It is an honor to be here and to help commemorate the birthday of Malcolm X, and more importantly, the continued relevance of his analysis on what is his 95th birthday here in 2020. When before his assassination, Malcolm X said that the US had, quote, perfected the science of image making, he was not only correct then, but he was also prescient in foreshadowing what is today by far the most pervasive, penetrative, and tightly managed media environment in human history. But more importantly, what Malcolm was outlining was a context in which media must be understood, one functioning as do many societal institutions in service of broader imperial, colonial, extractive, anti-labor, and certainly anti-Black processes. Even his often referenced house versus field Negro analogy spoke to a neo-colonial process of selecting from among the oppressed segments meant to both literally carry out the tasks required in assisting the rule over others, But another more pernicious function of these selected segments of enslaved or colonized people is that propagation of mythologies often associated with patience, salvation, and opportunity in everything but revolution. This process has certainly been described historically as neocolonialism, but here in the United States, it has been slightly rebranded as something else, something called neoliberalism. The process is the same, but the rebranding is essential in assuring that even criticism is discouraged from seeing it as part of an international process, connections Malcolm X always made. Neoliberalism, as it is called, has been about the last 50 years or so of corporate and business classes waging a kind of psychological warfare against us by offering segments of our communities fantasies of corporate access, entrepreneurial pipe dreams of freedom, Black capitalist mental landscapes, which are far more damaging psychologically and politically than any blackface, blaxploitation, music video, or Tyler Perry production could ever be. Neoliberalism is the literal rebranding by the most elite corporations, which along with private equity groups should always be understood as the legal fictions, Robert Reich has called them, that allow for anonymity among those who rule and decide our lives by the millisecond, the corporations who formed a literal business roundtable to unite their efforts in capturing every apparatus of messaging for the purposes of rebranding freedom as free market. Specifically, as David Harvey has summarized, neoliberalism is in the first instance a theory of political economic practices that proposes that human well-being can best be advanced by liberating individual entrepreneurial freedoms and skills within an institutional framework characterized by strong private property rights, free markets, and free trade. To make it happen, it was argued that there should be a, quote, assault upon the major institutions, universities, schools, the major publishing, the media, publishing, the courts, in order to change how individuals think about the corporation, the law, culture, and the individual. US businesses did not lack resources for such an effort, particularly when pooled. Hence that business roundtable, enhanced lobbying, and lobbying for lobbyists, buttressed by an equally enhanced media system whose content is determined by the more than $400 billion in annual ad revenue spent by these corporations to make sure that every drop of media we get via any platform or device has been shaped by their interests, where even what is euphemistically called entertainment is really the playground of intelligence agencies' views of law, order, and the corporation. So it is not about finding the connections from then when Malcolm X was assassinated to now. What we have to be ever more clear about is that there is no today without Malcolm's assassination and continued rebranding as something politically that he was not. This is how we can get 6 hours of Netflix telling us about Malcolm X, while almost entirely excluding his politics, his nationalism, his Pan-Africanism, socialism, and internationalist anti-colonial politics and organizational work. This is how you get well-funded and well-awarded scholars whose own politics are hostile to Malcolm's, but who become somehow his leading spokespeople in his absence. And this is why we must always gather on and offline to be reminded of who Malcolm was, what he continues to represent, and our need to incorporate his ideas in our work beyond symbolism, because to honor him is to pick up his and our fight. So thank you very much. I appreciate being involved in this conversation. And with that, I turn it back over to the rest of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jared. Hopefully we have Jonathan with us. Yes, great. I introduced you earlier. You were not with us, so go ahead.
Okay. I was having some technical difficulties. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. So basically, I think when we look at figures like Malcolm X, we must always situate them in the time and space in which they existed. You know, we cannot look at the ideas and philosophies of such revolutionaries without knowledge of the political situation of the time and the movement of the time. And so if we look at it that way, we can clearly see that, you know, Malcolm was engaged, but what was going on around him. And he assessed his political analysis and what he believed, not only domestically, but also. Also, internationally. You know, the Black freedom movement although now it's referred to kind of like the civil rights movement, shook the core of this nation and, placed at the forefront of American politics the rights of Black people here in America. And so we look at Malcolm's journey kind of from criminal to member of the Nation of Islam to a revolutionary nationalist. We can't see that as just like his personal journey, but that was connected intrinsically like with the life of Black America. And so, we have to see our own development as transformative as kind of his life. Hopefully the ideas that we have today aren't necessarily the ones we have tomorrow. We should be more, nuanced in our analysis as we gain experiences. Our core values and commitment to liberation should continue, but we have to develop our politics around what gets us to liberation and not the other way around. And so we have to see our values and politics in flux with the movement. And so when we look at the context in which Malcolm existed, we look at like the white lash against the Black freedom movement and the creation of these white citizens councils, the right way, these white racist groups, like the KKK. We can also kind of see that in our own time. The response kind of to both, the election of Obama and the Black Lives Matter movement, we kind of see the rise of white nationalism. We see the rise of, the alt-right. We see the rise of the Klan. And so there are lessons, I think, to be learned from how people dealt with those issues in the time of Malcolm and as we apply it to what was going on today. So in this period, we're also in a time of, Black faces in hot places. We have immense Black wealth, Black capitalism is all throughout our community. And we also see a kind of a critique of that same kind of thing that was kind of in its infancy during Malcolm's time. So his kind of like field Negro, house Negro analogy, and how, all Black folks aren't for us. All Black representatives don't necessarily represent the Black masses. And I think, can people not hear me? Can everyone hear me? Sorry. Yeah. When we see today, we see, these
Jonathan?
Black police officers.
Sorry to
Yes.
cut you off. We're just having trouble hearing you clearly. It's staticky. I don't know if you could hold the mic. But yeah, maybe that will make it better.
Okay.
Yes. Keep speaking.
All right. Okay.
This is much better.
So basically, we live in an era where there's, Black people in high places, Black presidents, Black police officers, the Black rich. At the same time, we have Black poverty. We have people dying from the lack of healthcare. We have Black people being brutalized by Black police officers. We think about, I don't think that there's a coincidence that Ferguson uprising happened under a Black president. I do think that we can kind of see the contradictions of the fact that, we have this immense Black wealth and these Black elite, but at the same time, the situation of the masses haven't changed. And I believe, during the 1960s, many people saw, including Malcolm himself, other people in the civil rights movement and the nationalist movement, that, legislative reform wasn't enough to liberate the Black community. Despite the passing of all this legislation, and despite the promises of, Lyndon Johnson and, John F. Kennedy and whoever, that the condition of the Black masses was pretty much still the same. And so I think that we in this era, we also have to look at what they were doing back then and also add it to our arsenal today. And when we look at organizing the Black community, we also have to see the Black community is not just limited to the United States of America. Malcolm X, being an internationalist and forming the Organization of Afro-American Unity, wasn't just thinking about Black people here in America, but throughout the continent. There's Black people through Central and South America and across the Atlantic. The OAAU was also formed from the inspiration of the Organization of African Unity. And so that means our politics is not just domestic, Black politics, but also international Black politics. And especially this administration kind of continues to ramp up its imperialism and its xenophobia, we have to kind of see how those policies affect, Black people in Africa, Black people in Central and South America. Thinking about Black immigrants here in the United States, thinking about Black Muslims, right? Malcolm was a Black Muslim, and contextualizing that within the war on terror. And so I think any Black organizer during this time period has to be an internationalist in the same vein that Malcolm was, has to be radical and Pan-African in their outlook. And so that's the way I believe that we can, not just defeat American capitalism domestically, but also countering U.S. imperialism and white supremacy worldwide.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we'll have more of these conversations in the second half of the event. But we're gonna switch over to Yusef. Yes, there we go.
What up, though, good people? Again, my name is Yusef Bunchy Shakur. I am from Detroit, proud member of Community Movement Builders. Malcolm X in relationship to neoliberalism. I think when we look at after the assassination of Malcolm X, in particular emerging in the 80s, there was like this rebranding or this rebirth of Malcolm, and through this neoliberal eyes of trying to water him down. And doing that, we tend to negate or there's attempt to negate who he was and what his theories was. If we look after 65, the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, even SNCC, all had began to incorporate many of Malcolm X's theories and philosophy, as well as Republican New Africa that was founded in Detroit, by the Henry brothers who developed and created an organization which was called the Malcolm X Society. And the Malcolm X theory was, revolution or liberation was based upon land, self-independence, armed self-defense, and et cetera. And we continue to see the evolution of those principles, as well as through NAPO, New African People's Organization, as well as their community organization, which was Malcolm X grassroots movement, and we see it present in today in community movement builders. And this theory and this practice is the evolution of Malcolm, as really the evolution of the Black liberation movement, as we continue to grow and develop within the framework of being oppressed within the society, where there's many contradictions of how do we frame Nigeria later a profound piece in relationship to Black capitalism, entrepreneur, the illusion of entrepreneurism, et cetera, which is again in the form of that of how we're sold Malcolm through materialism, but we're taught to reject his ideas. And again, that's another form of how neoliberalism tends to want to whitewash or negate the significance of Malcolm, which is that we are in a liberation struggle, and that liberation struggle essentially, as CMB and many other organizations upholding the banner that self-determination is a human right. Malcolm X explored the contradiction between human rights and civil rights, where he said, you can't get liberation through civil rights. Again, that's where he tied it into part of the Malcolm X theory is connecting on an international level, which we would call today intersectionality. He was intersecting the struggles with our African brothers, with our other African sisters and whatnot, and throughout the world. That what the beast that we're fighting is a global struggle. White supremacy is global, imperialism is global, capitalism, which is all a byproduct of colonialism. And to be able to destroy that and fight against that, not only do we in the realm of America, but internationally. So those are some of the premises that I will continue to talk about as we deconstruct neoliberalism in terms of trying to defuse how we engage our struggle. So deconstructing neoliberal is also to deconstruct ourselves. Many of us have went to school, read books, but it's a constant struggle, contradiction that we find ourselves in. So the understanding the Malcolm X theory is essentially to continue to transform ourselves, to stand on a strong foundation of liberation.
Thank you, Yusef. And our final speaker will be Shaheen, and then we'll open up with some questions for a larger conversation between us.
Hi, y'all. So I think, as everyone has already mentioned, towards the later years in his life, Malcolm X was increasingly embracing a radical internationalism, which was fostered by his exposure to revolutionary figures during his travel to Africa and Asia, and especially to Ghana, and his commitment to constant self-reflection, which, you know, deepened his political radicalism and his internationalism. And I think it became increasingly obvious that since capital, whether it is in the form of money or other assets, already crosses borders, our solidarity and liberation tactics have to also. And historically, as others have mentioned, capital crossing borders has meant colonization, slavery, but after sort of traditional colonization ended shortly after World War II, with a lot of countries in Asia and Africa newly gaining their independence, it resulted in what we have today, which is imperialism. And in the case of America, where American capital goes, generally our military and intelligence forces follow to defend that capital, whether it is overtly or you know, more covertly. And Malcolm X saw this happen with Congo during his time, when Patrice Lumumba was assassinated and deposed with America's aid, with the hopes of splintering the newly independent country, with the hopes of being able to exploit their national resources. There have been many other examples of the US or US-backed coups in the global South to expand US influence and power in those regions for the sake of stealing their resources. And I just want to give a few examples to make the connection between our foreign policy and our domestic policy to make a case for internationalism and why it is important for any liberation movement. So one of the examples I'm going to give is that of the US involvement in El Salvador. There was a coup, a US-backed coup in 1979 that ignited a 12-year civil war. And the US provided a lot of money in aid to the right-wing government of El Salvador, and trained their paramilitary forces, which targeted and terrorized and killed civilians. And a lot of those folks had to flee and try to come to the US. And when they arrived here, they were systematically excluded from any opportunities. This 12-year civil war has resulted in continued destabilization of the region, which is caused the vast fleeing of refugees in the region and caused the crisis that we had at the US-Mexico border in recent years. But of course, the framing of that, of what is happening at the border, more explicitly by the Republican administration, but you know, maybe less explicitly even by Democratic politicians, has always been about protecting our border. Our immigration policy has always been about protecting our border in the name of national security or protecting American jobs, and completely ignores our role in why these refugees are fleeing their countries to begin with. And this is hypocrisy is, of course, even more exasperating when you make the connection that the same capitalist forces, such as multinational corporations, which exploit the resources in these countries, also exploit the cheap migrant and immigrant labor. And they also support the outsourcing of our jobs overseas to exploit even cheaper labor, which of course then contributes to unemployment in our own country, which disproportionately affects Black and brown folks. So our foreign policy directly has an effect on our immigration policy, our employment policies. And of course, there's also the broader critique, as others have talked about, a broader anti-imperialistic critique of the settler colonial notion of nation states in general, and what do borders signify. So another example I want to talk about, unless I don't have time. Okay, I think I still have time. Is of course, you cannot talk about internationalism without talking about the U.S. support of the State of Israel. Malcolm X strongly opposed the oppression of the Palestinian people by the State of Israel and said the Zionist argument to justify Israel's present occupation of Arab Palestine has no intelligent or legal basis in history. Our immigration policy in the 1930s was overtly racist, and there were quotas for certain groups of people. So when European Jewish folks were fleeing the genocide and trying to come to the US, we turned them away. The US largely ignores this history when talking about the persecution of Jewish people in World War II and our role in it. And the current unquestioning support of Israel has less to do with solidarity of a persecuted group and more to do with protecting our capital interests in the region, including oil. And I want to use this to sort of give an example that is closer to home in our home state of Georgia. The Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, which is a program out of Georgia State University. Their mission statement reads that enhancing law enforcement, executive development, and international cooperation for the provision of better law enforcement services and public safety through the protection of civil rights with a focus on anti-terrorism training. Through this program, Georgia law enforcement officials have trained with the Israeli government, and the program has a history of whitewashing Israeli oppression of Palestinians. These partnerships have consequences, with the program having a history of teaching police officials dangerous tactics that further militarize our police and result in Islamophobia, leading to the further criminalization of Black and Brown people. So I hope I have, shown some connections about how our foreign policy has very tangible impact on the lives of Americans living here, or on the lives of people. I want to be careful about the use of the term American, but yes. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaheen. Thank you again to all of our panelists for your insightful presentations. And I think that what we've seen through our speakers, right, is how Malcolm's praxis continues to be relevant for us in these neoliberal times. And so I wanted to get right into it with our first question for tonight, which is the reason for this event, right, is can revolutionary politics serve us today, right? And Jared in the beginning already gave us a sense of what we mean when we're talking about neoliberalism in terms of how people feel, right, this 1980s, right, post-Cold War, post-anti-revolutionary movements, right, post-Black liberation movements, right, that we have come to feel it, as Jonathan pointed out, in very similar ways that we did before the neoliberal turn. And when I'm talking about we, I'm talking about, right, Black people in the United States specifically, but as all of us are pointing out to Malcolm's revolutionary politics being internationalist, right, that we're also seeing that the lives of African descended people specifically throughout the world, right, are still don't matter, right? To sort of use that very sort of famous hashtag at this point. But so I wanted to pose the question in thinking about Malcolm's revolutionary politics, which really is, if I wanted to paraphrase it, right, is a vision of justice as indivisible, right? So Malcolm organized and understood there were multiple axes around which you could bring people, right? And one of which, for him, right, all of these different axes, all of these different commonalities are wrapped up around this one form of politics that we're talking about that has come to be known as the Malcolm X theory. So I want to pose this very difficult, loaded question to all of you, right? Can the politics of Malcolm which range from, right, the ballot to the bullet, right? Can it really serve us today? Big question. Everyone's listening. Pressure's on. No, I'm just kidding. And anyone who wants to jump at the question first.
I guess I could address it. Yeah. I definitely think those politics can serve us today. Because I think one of the things I talked about is evolution. So Malcolm X, you can kind of see his political evolution throughout his time. And so that means he wasn't bogged down to kind of like a certain dogma that he had been taught and kind of stuck with that dogma, but instead he was able to look at what was going on around him, connect with people, even people he criticized. I mean, he was very critical of the civil rights movement, yet at the same time, I believe his politics were rooted in the liberation of Black people, and he saw that, well, if people are working in service of Black people, I'm willing to work with them, even despite disagreements. We all know about the disagreements with MLK. Malcolm X also, an organization of Afro-American unity. There was strong women leadership, something that before his time during the Nation of Islam, very patriarchal kind of worldview of the women's place in the movement. But Malcolm also evolved out of that position and realized everyone can be of service to Black revolution. The Black revolution is it's international, it's domestic. It includes everyone in the Black community that's willing to fight.
Jonathan, could you hold the mic still and not move your hand as you speak? Sorry.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I'm sorry. And so, yeah, essentially, I do believe his politics could serve us in that way, that nuance of even like the ballot or the bullet. That we're going to engage in politics, then we have to engage in politics in an intelligent manner and not be played as fools. At the same time, advocating for self-defense. Like you said, we don't preach violence, but we have to be able to defend ourselves in all ways.
Go ahead, Jared. You seem like you're getting ready.
I think we all are. I mean, I think the issue is everybody. How do we hold ourselves back and be polite to one another and over the excitement about talking? When talking about Malcolm X and related ideas. I was just trying to quickly isolate a couple of ways. I think, well, obviously the answer is yes, because every condition that faced Malcolm X, every material condition that faced Malcolm X as he was alive exists today or is in fact worse. So it's, to me, it's a non-starter, or it's a non-starter to suggest that he would not, or his ideas would have no relevance today. But just a couple of quick points. I mean, where a lot of the conversation today centers around electoral politics. Well, he was very clear. We should engage electoral politics as organized blocks, running our own candidates on our own platforms with our own agenda, running candidates that would be beholden to our communities, from local to national campaigns. So he was unambiguous about that. If we're going to engage on electoral politics, that's how we should be doing it. So if we're going to adhere, and I think we should, to his strategies in the 21st century, it would lead us to be very critical, if not fully walk away from the established two-party system and develop something else, or to address ourselves to the two-party system in a very different way, not just waiting for whichever Democrat wins the primary and then be bludgeoned with notions of having to defend their history of the right to vote, to vote for the lesser of evil. Others could be easily involved. Obviously, we just see, again, there's every reason, as Malcolm X was starting his arguments in defense of self-defense with police violence, saying that the police do locally what the military does internationally. We see the exact same problems exist today. There's more rampant police violence against all manner of our communities today than there was then. And obviously, the war machine in the United States has expanded beyond the time when he was even alive, to the point now where we have the longest war in the history of this country ongoing and seemingly without end, despite president or party. And there are many more that we could continue to talk about in terms of his redistributive ideas about how we should address ourselves to the economy, which is something I think that I'll stop now and I'll want to maybe bring back up when we address some of the questions I see coming up about reparations. But anyway, I just wanted to say that there's a number of ways we can apply his ideas right now, and I think we absolutely should.
So I'll add on to that we have to keep in mind that Malcolm X represents the Black struggle of liberation. So he is not him per se, it's the ideas of fighting for Black liberation. So whatever we do or how we engage electoral politics is on that premise alone. And so as Jared kind of alluded to, which was an unfinished thought process that he was developing. And that's our goal, our job. And one of the things that made Malcolm, many others, Marcus Garvey, Ella Baker, et cetera, very strong, they was independent of the system, meaning that their paycheck wasn't, their livelihood per se wasn't tied to the system. So many of us on here may, we did, that's a contradiction, right? So, and within a liberation struggle, the more you're moved from that system, you can be bold like Malcolm. You could push the envelope like Malcolm and others like him in terms of the up mobility of the struggle. So I mean, fundamentally, we're talking about between the ballot and the bullet. And the theory of that is we'll engage the system, but we'll engage it on this in this means for this end. And on this end is ultimately towards liberation. So it's not to promote that situation, but ultimately to expose the contradictions, to educate and move our people away from that, to develop and create our own. That sounds good, but the work of that is very confusing, very hard, because ultimately, how do we not lose ourselves into value, to create more value on a system that oppresses us?
Thank you. Any other person want to jump in? So one of the things I wanted to talk about is, right, sort of the way that Malcolm, at least I hope, lives in the minds of people, right, is this by any means necessary, right? And he asks us to do this work of analyzing the current situation, right, and analyzing Black people not just as a minority within the United States, but right on a global scale, at a global level, right? So I would like for you guys to speak not just about internationalism, but this idea of bringing the case, right, of Black people to supranational institutions, right, like the UN. Of course, Malcolm is speaking at a point when the UN seems like, right, it's a space that can bring about some forms of freedom, right? But today, I think all of us would reject the UN as this progressive possibility, maybe, right? But what are the means that we have available today, right, in this neoliberal time that can really elevate these struggles at this international stage that Malcolm says that if we do the correct analysis, right, that we must always be thinking about these struggles, right, as a multi-pronged struggles, right? So what are the means that we have today? Is it towards organizing towards forming blocks to vote in this current, upcoming election, or are there other things that we should also be putting our energies towards, right? Because electoral politics is very much domestic, right? And we're talking about how Malcolm spent so much time doing this work of internationalism and not just saying to folks, hey, you should be in solidarity, write a letter, right? How do we strategize together, right? And really move away from sort of lip service of solidarity to really strategizing and moving campaigns together, right? So that is sort of, I know it's a huge question, right? But I want us to talk about these means that we have available today. Like, what are they, right? Given the analyses that we are put forth, right? Things are the same in so many ways, but they're not the same, right? They're not exactly the same. So the analysis has to be sharpened and has to be updated. So what are the means that you think we have available besides, right, the ballot if we were to form an organized bloc? that's my last question, and I'm gonna turn it over to the audience. But those are the things that keep me up at night. So I wanted to talk to you about this live.
So I'll add real quick. I think the means is one, really solidifying what do we define as a Black liberation movement. Again, we have to be aware our movement has been attacked, undermined, et cetera, et cetera. In every liberation struggle, there's pitfalls, there's incarcerations, and et cetera. And within the framework of tying it globally, the question is how many of us not only have been somewhere globally, how many of us really think globally? I mean, again, moving it from this theoretical framework to a practical framework. One thing that we do have in this time, like again, social media, you can literally connect, be in somebody's lap in Ghana, et cetera, right? So do we have a strategy that we're utilizing that in the framework of internationalism, but also within the framework of America, in particular around Malcolm and anybody that came after Malcolm or before Malcolm that was similar? There's still a lot of myth and negative connotation to them. Again, if you ask the average person about Malcolm, the same way the Black Panther Party, he was a Negro, a nigga with a gun. I mean, this is how they've been trained and whatnot. And then, I mean, some Black folks still like, man, I don't want to talk about Malcolm. I mean, so there's so much work that we have to do. I mean, again, the question, like I was on the panel earlier, when did we even begin to like Malcolm, or Malcolm became a part of our lives? Some of us was young, some of us when our adult, and this all is in relationship to the Black struggle. So once we can really clarify that, it helps us clarify how do we do the work, and doing the work is on ourselves, internally and externally, and within. I mean, neoliberalism is very strong today, in a way that we haven't ever seen, and so, but not saying it can't be defeated, but we have to develop it and solidify a movement and an organization that will amplify our commitment.
What I would like to add is, one of the things that I think a lot about is, just like anti-Blackness is prevalent in the United States, it's prevalent amongst other brown countries, and so when you talk about Black liberation and solidarity, one of the things that I think about is what is the role of the diaspora of brown people to hold maybe their if they were born in another country and immigrated to the US, or if they still have relatives, for instance, what is my role in combating anti-Blackness among South Asians, both here in the US, but also in the continent, in South Asia, and how do we make those connections between, the oppression of Muslims in India and the global rise of Islamophobia in right now, with Black liberation. And I think we have more tools available right now to do those things because of the internet and social media, but I think it needs to go beyond that. It needs to go, to protest at consulates. When you hear about your country doing, I can't, this is live, so I can't cuss, but doing effed up things,
Yes, you can cuss. I don't know if other people agree, but I think you should speak freely.
It's going to be a
I think you should speak freely.
if I can't cuss. So yeah, I think it needs to go to organize a freaking protest in front of your consulate if there is anti-Black policies that your country of birth or your parents or grandparents' country of birth is doing, and you have challenge the anti-Blackness in your families, both here in the US and in India. So
does anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I'll definitely comment. I think also an important thing to do is first, I mean, in order to even build anything, you have to be organized. And so, as soon as Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam, he formed two organizations. He formed the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, a religious organization, and he formed the a political organization, the organization of Afro-American unity. And so I think, forming organizations is the first step to, collect people and root people somewhere. And then from there, you can kind of spread out both domestically and internationally. So I see kind of CMB as like one of those organizations, community movement builders. It's not just based, it's not just organizing about, Black issues here in America. We're also trying to connect with, Black people abroad. At the same time, we have international solidarity with, with various, liberation movements and groups across the world. And so I think that, and we do live in the age of the internet. So it is, it does make communication a little easier, but also, going door to door. And also other means of communicating with people, across this nation, and also internationally. And so I think, organization is really the first step for anything, for whether it's politics, whether it's, community issues, whether it's dealing with something internationally. You have to be in an organized body with people who have similar ideas as you and who are going in the same place.
I just was going to say that was going to be the point I wanted to echo, that I think we're in a profound moment of disorganization, and that is being, I think, misunderstood as social media followers and internet engagement. But that's not organization. It's kind of like a friend of mine pointed out the distinction between reading and studying. There's a difference between reading a book and studying a book. And I think politically, there's a difference between being engaged online and with many people in social media and doing the work of real community movement organization building. And it's very difficult work, but I think we just have to recognize we're in a profound moment of disorganization. And then that we, to my own particular focus, think that we need to pay more attention to the role that social media are playing in creating that profound moment of disorganization, and start to rebuild along those lines. But I do fundamentally agree that absolutely that we're not organized well enough to be doing any of the number of the things that we need to be doing.
Thank you. So there are many, many questions. And so I'm trying to combine them in some ways. So some folks have questions about whether we're thinking about Afro-Brazilians, right, and Afro-descendants in other parts of the Americas, right, within this larger frame of Blackness when we talk about Black liberation. Other folks had questions about, right, Black liberation, the relationship between Black liberation and internationalism, right, so understanding Malcolm more in terms of the different ways that he organized, right? Maybe some of you can speak more to that. And also connecting again, right, the reparations movement as yet, right, another type of campaign, right, movement that could bring people from the African, from Africa and the African diaspora together, right? So it's, thinking about Black liberation and internationalism a little bit more. It seems like folks are interested in us unpacking that a little bit more. So are Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Colombians, right, in this imaginary of Blackness when we talk about Black people, right? Both the folks who are outside of the US and also, right, as Jonathan brought up earlier, right, Black immigrants. So could you speak to some of that? Which I think we've already touched on, but folks sort of want us to deepen this conversation.
Can I, if I may, there's something, there's a thread in these arguments that I'm excited to try to address very quickly.
Okay.
The first thing I wanted to say that I think is constantly misunderstood, and I think happening a lot with some of the hashtag quote unquote movements online that are confusing the issues. When Malcolm and others, and I would agree, talk about internationalism, this is not to detract from or to take away focus from Black liberation. It is a tactic to gain Black liberation. And if anything, it's a selfish in a positive kind of way like John Henry Clark used to talk about the essential selfishness of survival. We need to have the essential selfishness. And part of that essential selfishness of survival is to connect with other people whose influence in the world might help your own situation out. So this idea that keeps getting promoted, I think in many pockets online and elsewhere, that internationalism, Pan-Africanism, is somehow, a way to take away focus from the struggles of Black people in the United States is totally misunderstanding the strategy and tactic. The other thing is, just very quickly, that one of the reasons why I personally, and I've never followed a thread or seen the thread in Malcolm or many others focused on reparations, is not because of an argument that would argue against Black people here deserving reparative justice, but it's more about what it would mean to go about getting it, how that would be gotten, and what it really means in terms of it being a distraction from other, I would argue, more important organizational or even theoretical focus. So, for instance, we already see it in some of the questions here, that reparations becomes a divisive issue in these solidarist efforts that I think are necessary as a tactic for any of us to get a certain amount of liberation, because then it causes all these arguments about who's Black, who should get what, how should it be gotten, how much should it be. And if we've seen that the tactic in response, we're 50 years in and we can't even get Congress to approve a study, much less actually talking about redistribution. So personally, I think we should, instead of advocating or focusing on making the argument, which would require an electoral process and involve more than 2/3 of the country to support a massive redistribution of tax revenue or whatever to just Black Americans, tactically, I just don't think this is realistic. Never mind all the other philosophical distractions I think it causes. So my argument would be that, and I think it's more along the lines of what Malcolm was arguing and many others in terms of institutional redistribution and a challenge to the capitalist structure that produces the wealth that we're then arguing about its distribution, that we should at least tactically start saying, instead of arguing about who should get what and how much, let's focus on the annual gross domestic product of the United States, which we all contribute to when we pay a bill and go shopping, whether we're owners or consumers. We don't have to argue about any of that anymore, at least initially, and just say, let's target the $20 trillion and say that must be redistributed so that nobody in this country is starving without quality food, healthcare, education, so on and so forth. And then from there, the individual community, starting, of course, with Black people in the United States, can start to deal with the specifics of the repairs necessary beyond that. But I think tactically, that's where we should start. And I think that is something I at least think we get from the example of Malcolm and others who are saying we need to go, as you said, to those supranational entities. But in other words, something bigger, obviously this is the GDP is national, but something bigger than an individual call that I think strategically is just not going to be heard. Anyway, so I appreciate you all letting me try to jump out there quick, and I hope some of that made sense.
Yes.
And I would add, in terms of like when we talk about international, like when we're saying Black, for me, Black is also interchangeable for African, right? It's a matter of the dialects and relating to within the American context, but we know that we descend from African people, right? And it's about our growth and our transformation within a liberation ideology. As Malcolm and others began to make the distinction in saying Negro to Black, and as Malcolm began to expand, he began to identify within the framework of African people. And so within the context of a liberation struggle, again, I mean, look, the enemy is global. And if the enemy is global, there's the opportunity to connect and build relationships against a common foe, but also for African people within the diaspora of reconnecting to our source and building. Someone asked a question fundamentally around a relationship between Africans in Africa or in the diaspora or other oppressed people to America. I mean, more oppressed people have more shit in common than we think we do by against the same enemy. However, we have not done the internal work. the internal work of cleaning ourselves up to see our precise and correct enemy and not allowing ourselves to play against each other. So something as particular, we want to zero in on reparations in America. Reparations is really a conversation that actually is a distraction. Why? Because niggas just want money. Niggas, hey, shit, I just put the money on the table, baby, give it to me, I mean, however, within the liberation movement, it's deeper than that. But if we just gonna act like everyday Americans, niggas gonna fight, niggas gonna do what niggas do about money. I mean, we just have to keep it real in that sense. And if we do that, that is a distraction from a liberation movement. Motherfuckers ain't fighting for liberation; they fighting for money. And as soon, we see it now. As soon as the money, that $1,200 gone, we back broke, and we ready to rob the next nigga. So that's where transformation has to occur. We have to transform ourselves to be better human beings. And doing that, we understand that what we're fighting against local. The conversation internationally also reflects within America. Like, I'm in Detroit. People say, why do you want to connect with Jared in Baltimore or DC, or why you want to connect with Kamal in Atlanta? Because we fighting the same stuff. You can't just fight in Detroit and think Detroit gonna be free while Atlanta's still oppressed. No, you can't liberate Black folks in America and think that we just gonna let African people, other oppressed people still be oppressed. That don't even make no sense.
I feel like we're getting into it now. Like, everybody's heated up. Okay, do we want to continue on this, or we want to keep exploring some? A lot of people are making comments more than questions. But before we got into some of the other questions, since we did talk about Malcolm and the use of Black, right? And I'm in no way an expert, but because of this moment, I read as many speeches as I could, right? So he says in 1964, now the Black Revolution has been taking place in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America. When I say Black, I mean non-white, Black, brown, red, or yellow, right? So he's doing something there by forcing us to think about, right, Black in multiple ways, right? Both to mean, right, African descended, right, but also to think about Black, right, as a form of solidarity across, right, supposed biological racial categories, right, against, right, the folks we call white people, right? And so I think, like, that's why I said earlier that I when I read Malcolm, I see that he is organizing around multiple different axes, right, and asking us to do that work of really seeing that justice is indivisible, right? So as Jared said, well, we know internationalism is linked, like, that's part of what's going to get us this Black liberation, right? Even in a self-interested way. And for me, that's one of the things that I think Malcolm brings to my understanding of internationalism, right? Is also the power that we have to give new meaning to these words, right? And therefore to, like, push people to identify around, right, potentially new strategies, right? So, yes, some folks are interested in us talking about revolutionary politics in relation to the COVID crisis. It would have been impossible for us not to address this. We are on this panel in this forum as a result, right, primarily of COVID. So I wanted us to talk about whether revolutionary politics had anything to offer us. And I think we already know the answer, but I must pose it, right? What does it have to offer us in terms of understanding how to survive this COVID-19 crisis? The floor is yours.
So I'm currently in public health, not in infectious disease, cancer, but it's terrifying being in public health right now because COVID-19 has affected everything, right? Cancer care, because patients are scared to come in to the hospital, and for a while, cancer care had to stop. So I think for me, one of the things that has been, because Facebook has all of our searches and the algorithms, but one of the things that has been on my mind that I've been thinking about is thinking about countries and places that have gotten a handle on this situation, even without a vaccine, right? And the state of Kerala in India comes to mind. And they have way more challenges than we do as a country in America. So they are way more congested. The state of Kerala has way more congestion of a population, way more poverty, but they got a handle on COVID-19 because it's a communist state. There is, a history and an infrastructure of public health and education in the state. And that has resulted in the public trusting the government when they said, we need to shut down, you need to tell us where you've been, and you need to let us if you need to be inside your house and completely be quarantined, we will deliver groceries to you, And so when I'm reading these articles, they are being able to return not back to normal, because there is no back to normal, but even in the state of Kerala, now they're being able to leave their homes without being terrified of the air they breathe, because they contained the virus, and in a matter of months. And it was the person, the head of the Department of Public Health is such an intelligent woman, but she credits being able to do everything she can directly to the history of Kerala and the history of communist politics in Kerala, including land distribution that resulted in folks having a place to stay, because it's very hard to contain a virus when you're shelterless. So when I look at these examples of countries that, or even if not countries, but states that are explicitly communist, or countries that are not explicitly communist, but during this time, very much acted like communist or socialist countries, with mass social safety nets to contain the virus, I'm baffled that more people are not seeing that it's very hard to tell people to stay home when they're afraid that they can't pay their bills or what's going to happen next. And
And at the same time, I mean, to me, I think we're actually seeing exposed all of the failures and myths and frauds of our economic model, of our the socioeconomic model that we're stuck under. I got into an argument with somebody recently who said he was trying to defend the existing economic system by saying something to the effect that when I raised the question, look at the elite now grabbing the collective wealth we've helped produce so that they can have it redistributed back to them in greater numbers than already, so that they can survive the fact that we're not able to go spend our money on their owned products and goods and services. So he was saying, and then he was trying to argue, the owner of the pizzeria is more important than the one buying the pizza. And I said, how does that work? I said, this moment proves the fallacy of your argument. If you can own all the pizzerias in the world, if none of us are able to afford or get to the pizzas to buy it, or if we're all losing our jobs and can't afford to go shop and buy your pizza, then you're broke. So in other words, this to me is the perfect moment to raise questions as radical as we can get about what we can do to make adjustments going forward, and always being reminded, as bad as it is getting now, I'm already seeing propaganda coming up. What I feel is propaganda popping up in news coverage and even so-called entertainment, making allusions to how good it was before the crisis, to suggest that we were in some sort of utopian state of affairs before all of this happened. And I don't think we should ever, as Malcolm X reminded us, let somebody plunge a knife 9 inches in our back, pull it out 6, and expect to be thanked. And that's exactly what I think is coming down the line as we recover from this latest crisis.
And I think within this crisis, to Jared's point, if someone does have revolutionary politics, this is the most appropriate opportunity. Again, to Jared's alluded, it supports the arguments. If you've been talking about for years how fucked up this country is, or the economic system, they proved it. It's nothing that you need to do per se. It's proving it itself. It's giving you all the ammunition. It now is our job to prove our worth as revolutionaries. It's our job as theoreticians or organizers or whatnot to get out there and organize, educate. The challenge is, what are the platforms? How do we engage? How do we serve people? But more importantly, I mean, some of the work may feel band-aidish and whatnot. I mean, there's a great article that came that questioned or challenged the around mutual aid and how that not getting caught up in the fallacy of that and really digging deeper and tying that in. I mean, so those are some of the challenges of the contradiction. But as a revolutionary, we should be licking our lips for this moment. This is what, again, our opportunity to earn our pay.
Anyone else want to jump in? So, and I think we can come back to these questions too and connect to them as well. One of the questions, and I think, Jonathan said this, and I'm only restating what you said, Jonathan, in hopes that if people hadn't heard you, that through my words they can. But right, Jonathan talked about Malcolm X critiquing the Black establishment, right? The Black leaders in general. And so this, one of the questions that
Uh-oh, did we lose our moderator?
I feel like it. She froze.
It sounded like when she was starting to raise a question about for you, Jonathan, about a critique of Black celebrity or elite status or the bourgeoisie, for lack of a better term. Maybe that's a good place to start until we get our moderator back.
I saw the question.
Yeah,
I'm back.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I have taken the liberty to reformulate some questions.
Okay.
So I didn't
Okay.
exactly phrase it as this person has, but we can also read the question, which is right there. So what role do local politicians play in Black liberation? So, we can start in terms of talking about Malcolm X's positioning historically and, what we might want to say today.
Yeah, I think they could play a role. I think it's based on how we're organized as a community, and also even how we define liberation. Because I'm pretty sure if you ask, took a survey of people and you asked them like if they believed in Black liberation in a generic sense, people would probably agree. But I think in order for any politician to play a role in Black liberation, first we have to have a program. So we have to have things that we say, if you get in this office, that you need to support X, Y, and Z. So if you get in office and you vote to, extend tax cuts or increase the war budget or, increase policing and things versus, trying to dismantle the systems, then we have to look at those politicians like, well, you're not for Black liberation. And so first we have to have a program, one that centers, what we want in the now, but also looking forward to the future, and then organizing ourselves and putting certain people in office. And if they aren't for that, then we can't say they are for Black liberation. And so at this moment, I don't know if we really have a lot of politicians that are doing that. I know there are a few who I think who are, good progressive fighters, but I think we're lacking that kind of liberatory politic. That isn't just for reforms. Reforms are good, but also questioning the system as it exists. So not just operating under let's increase wages, but also saying there's something fundamentally wrong where people's lives are dependent upon wages. Yeah.
And so in connection to that question, just so that we can give people a greater chance to address it in depth. So one question says, so how do we create a groundswell to apply pressure toward the coming election, or is that not part of the agenda?
how could it be? We're already. I mean, I'm in Maryland, and not that I'm a registered Democrat, I could vote anyway, but I can't even. My primary is useless. They already told me Biden is the Democratic nominee, and if I don't vote for him, I'm somehow, you know, in line with Trump and Hitler and whoever else that they keep saying, that those of us who are critical of voting for a Biden or a Democrat or whoever, you know, might be. So we have to be. This is why, as I understood Jonathan's point, and I agree, if we go back and read, and I think we should, or listen to what Malcolm was saying about the vote, that's the version that I think we need to be engaged in, where again, we are running candidates, we are developing a platform well in advance of let's hurry up and do it in a few months before the latest election, because what would we be doing at this point? Either we're going to be developing a groundswell for Biden tacitly or, you know, overtly, or we're going to be removed, you know, further marginalized with all of these name calling and branding of those of us who are saying, I can't vote for this guy. Because if you read his actual record, do you see do you see the people he's actually populating his cabinet with right now? I mean, like, what are we talking? Anyway, so we need to, I think, be getting to the politics and the business of real organization at the grassroots level, a la Malcolm X, before we start talking about engaging, certainly national electoral politics.
And I will add within that framework, we need to go against the grain, and to go against the grain is using our energy and our effort to build a groundswell of our own movement that is not tied to a Democratic or the Republican system. I know that doesn't sound exciting to many of us, but I mean that's what the excitement is. I mean, in regard, because if we're doing that, then it adds more value to the system that we're saying we're fighting against. That's contradicting our own purpose. If we're truly committed to revolutionary politics, if we're truly committed to black liberation, or just liberation and all. I'm not saying that we don't engage on them, but again, and the reality of George Jackson was saying, you know, there's people who's going to die tomorrow. Unfortunately, some of them that we can't save right now. But in the long term, if we build the type of movement that we want to, we'll save lives down the road. You know, we'll build what we needed down the road. And so what I'm trying to point out is that the sacrifice that we make today will be for the greater good, and rebuilding our own movement. So, you know, white politicians, black politicians can no longer just come in our community and rally us up just to vote for them just because. You know, we someone said something about creating agenda. Agenda has to come out of a movement. I mean, we've seen too many of us look at Bobby Rush. Bobby Rush came out of the Black Panther Party. He was a deputy minister of defense. At the greatest level of expression for radical politics. Now you seem like, what the hell was wrong with this Negro, right? I mean, it's ludicrous, and that joke is on the black movement, because we still have not done what we needed to, because we're still young and growing, developing as a movement.
And so connected to that about, right, practicing some of the theory, and you talked a little bit about it, Yusef, earlier when you mentioned a couple of organizations that put Malcolm's theory to practice. One of the panelists thinks, right, what do we think about agriculture, right, as a revolutionary tool, such as creating community gardens to feed the community, right, and really practice this self-determination that we talk about. So does anybody want to take that on, right?
I just in general think anything that can be helpful in the short term and can be used to help explain how that particular act and that particular community is connected to these broader isms is a good thing. I just think that I think we have to, with what all the things that we're doing, because certainly where a lot of us live, that isn't even possible in this country. But whatever it is that we think that we're doing, I think we should recognize that it's not enough, it's insufficient, and at best, it's as the Panthers described it, it's a survival program. And I just want to, Bunchy said something that I you said, and I think you're right, but how you said it, I don't know, it just grazed me. I want to, you said like I'm hearing this is me. I think I'm projecting my own struggles onto you. But what I heard you say, like, I want to give us a little bit of some credit here. Like we are, like, you and I, our generation is the ones that came up after the generations before us were wiped out by the most powerful state in human history. So I think you said, my bad, I'm projecting because we are having to redevelop this in many ways anew, with some of our brightest minds exiled, imprisoned, assassinated, totally disorganized as I see it, in terms of the ways that we need to. So I always just like, I do get a little defensive in saying, like, there's so much we have to do, but I want to recognize what has been done and is being done to us in that process. Please correct me, because I think I am projecting onto you what I hear others say and I get defensive about.
I'm not dismissing previous generations by any means. What I'm saying again, that even with all of that, we're in the infancy stages. If we just look at you and I and your growth and my growth, like, we took different paths to be on the same level of where we at, but unfortunately we don't have one university that you and I could go to and sit in the same classroom to learn about those struggles and whatnot. And even now, like, we're within. I mean, I love what you said earlier. Like, we're building something in the framework of chaos, and that chaos is, we still haven't dealt with the crack era. On top of heroin, on top of mass incarceration, which all are symptoms of Black oppression. And unfortunately, what has happened now, that we've broken up into different fragments. In Detroit, either if you're not for the for education, you ain't doing shit. If you ain't for the water rights, you ain't doing shit. If you ain't for food sovereignty, you ain't doing shit. If you ain't in the neighborhoods, you ain't doing shit. But there's no umbrella where we all coexist, and that's where the Black liberation movement, or theology of a framework. And so how do we create a value where, again, we all don't necessarily have to agree ideology if we understand the outcome of what we're trying to achieve?
Right on.
I don't want the question to be completely lost, right? We talked and I know that, Jared, you said that at best, right, they're survival tools, right? These community gardens, right? And yet, right, that's what makes them that much more important, right, for us to continue to push for and to create and as many spaces as we can, including urban spaces. Jonathan, did you have a comment? I'm pointing at you as if you're in front of me. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I agree with Jared that they're survival tools. I think personally, I see community gardens not so much in the vein of like how to feed people, although it does feed people, but as a way to kind of rally a community, because a garden as a central location, as a collective activity, I think that Black organizations can use that to then organize Black people to fight for more, right? So it's not just then about the garden, but then, you get people in the garden. You could talk about rent, like the fact that, they don't have money for the rent. You could talk about greater issues from that, I guess you could say, survival program. And even moving from survival programs to more, sometimes when I hear it's like survival program, it doesn't sit right with me, because I feel like I've been just surviving just as a Black man in this country for the last 17, 18 years. Like I've literally been like sometimes hand to mouth when it comes to survival. And so like taking that and even moving beyond just survival, like I want more. Like I want healthcare. I want reparations too. I want every single thing that we can possibly squeeze out of this system until the system says we can't give you no more. Then we need to replace it, because we can see that it can't give us everything.
So we have a couple of questions. How is everybody feeling? Still got energy? Yes. Okay, cool. So a couple of questions, and I'm going to try to sort of combine them, right? So similarly to how Yusef, right, I guess has qualified, right, the movements that preceded us, right? Folks are wanting to know, how do we understand and view today's Black organizations, right? As far as how radical they are, right? In light of the neoliberal politics, as Jared mentioned earlier, right, of so many funders, right, coming to essentially control, right, how movements do their work, right? So I wanted to sort of connect these two questions because perhaps this is, exposing my line of thinking, right? That too many mass-based movements are in the hands of large funders, right? So how do we see generally Black organizations as a movement group in general, in the neoliberal times that we live?
I think this era tends to get a real bad rap, as if like this nonprofit industrial complex just started in this era. Like that always existed in some form or some fashion, right? Again, but when we look really examine it, certain organization, there was individuals who wasn't tied to it, but definitely there was some seed money, right? So this just wanted to qualify that. But I think because of our inability to find space to work together, I think what happens is that we're still functioning from a position of, hey, I like you, you like me, versus the values, versus really like getting into some deep ideological struggles. And that's where in the previous generations they had us beat on ideas. We have them beat on rhetoric, the hot social media era. And if we can, and it's not an either or, it's a both and critiques and contradictions exist. But I know, as some of my elders and OGs tell me, like, all contradiction not antagonistic. If you ain't broken my house, try to steal my TV. If you ain't try to, I went to the bathroom, you try to talk to my woman. There's some real, disrespect to my mama. Some real shit like that. Everything else should be negotiable. I think those are the real conversations that we can have, because me and Jared can talk. But then here's somebody come in and say, "Well, Jared, I really like you. I'm going to give you such and such, right?" And Jared, because what happens, hey, Jared, I just love your new book. You're so awesome, man. I just want to, and before you know it, we sucking on our own ego, and when we get into sucking on our own ego, it preys on those what we're hearing now, those pre-existing conditions, those pre-existing beasts and whatnot, and the beasts that we have are not new beasts, they're old beasts, and I think we haven't really done a good job of really, like, we still carrying the old beef, man. I'm with Malcolm, I'm with Elijah, I'm with W. Du Bois, I'm with Marcus Garvey. Why we can't coexist? And then when you throw in the money will always dictate if you don't have the right values. And the values that will govern us should be liberation, should be revolution. And if we can truly say we brothers and sisters and build that relationship, we could overcome many of the challenges. And again, if we move away from, because you can motherfuckers like me, he was cussing, he was real, right? They like me today, then tomorrow I might put on and talk like I got my degree from Michigan and shit. And then they might not like my ass tomorrow. So we have to give room to build real authentic relationships to allow us to be our real authentic selves, which we are oppressed human beings. And we're still learning how to be liberated from our oppression.
Can I just say real quick, one, I don't really know exactly what to do, and I hope that that's okay to share publicly on a panel. Because, and one of the reasons why I say that is because, just to share a little bit of my autobiography, which I don't often like to do, but when I came out of the military in the early 90s, I found myself trying to already involved like in a process. I was trying to study. I was trying to catch up. I was trying to catch up to what I saw coming up in the Malcolm X grassroots movement and Kamau and all of them. I was trying to catch up to them and learn how to organize through those efforts. And all of a sudden, it feels like a couple of decades later, it feels really quick, shorter than that even, a well-funded, much more media and technologically savvy generation has been funded up around us. and been able to not only take over media space and obviously attention from communities and elements of our communities we're trying to organize, but are leading them, and I think, in very dangerous neoliberal political directions. So I found it like this is still to me a very confusing moment in terms of how to respond, admitting my, generational or whatever age, limitations. But I really am concerned about those who are coming up now who don't even have the examples of what I consider to be offline, real grassroots political organization, all of which I still think has to happen far more than is, and with far more attention that seems to be a greater focus on like event planning online and social media wise. So I'm very concerned about that, which is why I just think it's important that we're doing what we're trying to do here by reminding people what Malcolm was actually advocating and how sadly but eerily relevant all of that still is.
Yes. I know, Jonathan, you have a comment?
Yeah, to make a comment, kind of about, it was mentioned earlier about, kind of like funding and philanthropy within within Black movements and nonprofits, came up. And I feel like a lot of like activism, especially today, the people I'm around, friends of mine, comrades of mine, that there's a heavy influence of kind of like this philanthropy, nonprofits, kind of money from foundations flowing into the movements. And I think people see it as attractive because it's like, you need money to survive. And then, people get into these types of activist spaces thinking, well, hey, I'm getting paid and I'm doing the work. And so they see it as like, okay, this must be a positive thing. And then after a year or two, they kind of realize the limitations of it, but there's no alternatives. And so I think we also need to have like a historical critique too. If we think about even in the 1960s, this stuff isn't new. They funded, white liberal philanthropy has always had, unfortunately, a place in Black movements. But we also have to see the limitations of that. Even if we look at an organization like SNCC, they were getting, funding and, from various forces. And then it came to a point where their politics got a little too radical, and then that funding was pulled from them. And so we have to think about ways in which we can kind of fund ourselves through all types of means. It's not easy, but organizations have done it before. The UNIA did it in the early 20th century. Right? They figured out how to do it, and it's not just about morally taking money from this group or that group. It's also about who determines your politics. Because if you're attached to something outside of your community, then that has a pull on what types of activism you do. What are the things, the politics that you do have, and so being self-funded means you're in control of all of that. And so I think we have to figure out ways. It's going to be hard, but figure out ways how to self-fund. And even for those who've been in those sectors, it's like you've learned a lot of skills on how to raise money. Come to a community organization and help us raise money, or something or another.
As someone who's been in these nonprofit spaces, but also in academia and seen the bullshit of funding and research, I think that be as subversive as you can. They are giving you a paycheck so you don't die, like your rent, but use till they actually push you out or threaten you with firing you or pulling your funding. Be as subversive as you can. And what because this has happened to me where I've had to leave workplaces when I got too subversive. Be as subversive as you can. And what that'll do is, even if you eventually get pushed out, you will find out who in your workplace is your true comrade that you can then organize with, even outside that workplace. And you will have those connections. And in the meantime, they're paying not to die,
So, we don't have too much time left, but in the future, when y'all drop acronyms, if you could spell them out, right? SNIG, UNIA, because we do have some folks listening internationally, some of my comrades in Haiti, my friends. So I think, you know, it would be good to define these acronyms when we drop them. So in the interest of moving forward with some of the questions, I don't think we're going to get to all of them, certainly. And perhaps some of them are beyond the scope of this conversation. And maybe this points to the need for more of these conversations. But one of the questions was about, in the context, right, of neoliberalism, where billionaires, right, through their multinationals can hold more sway than governments and national economies, right? What does the work look like? And I'm thinking, especially in terms of what we were talking about earlier in terms of internationalism, right? And the pushback is always, well, we got to get our house in order first, right? And so someone texted me and said, well, what if other people have some of their things in order? Might we take leadership from them, right? If we're trying to be at this internationalist level, right? If we're looking at other Afro-descended people who are organizing in other parts of the world, is there a way for us to plug into what they're already doing too, right? If we think back at what Malcolm said, right? He said, right, speaking specifically about Africa, African problems are our problems are African problems, and talks about not thinking of ourselves in the US as a minority, but thinking about this global stage, and says we might call our African brothers or Asian brothers to our rescue, right? So what about if we moved away from US exceptionalism, right, and started to think about that there are other groups of people that are revolutionaries that we might look to for some kind of, right, guidance and both clarifying analyses, but also thinking about, right, transnationalizing our strategies for real, right? So what is this, what are the ways that the work has changed, or should it change in light of the fact that multinationals, right, control the way that the world is organized, right, including the state? And I know that most of our advocacy work, right, is directed at the state, when we already know, right, the hypocrisy, and we know the intimate relationship that capital and state have, right? So what in light of that reality, then what does the work become? This is like our last question. Give me your last bit of energy, and then we can thank everyone. And maybe this is the question that, you know, we sort of leave with and think about more. But if anyone, you know, feels swayed to answer this very large question, please do.
Well, as I heard you phrase it, I was thinking that I don't know, again, philosophically at least, I don't know if there's that much of a difference between the whatever state and capital formations existed at the time Malcolm lived and the way it's organized now, in the sense that even at his time, he was talking about supranational forces that were beyond the state, that were impacting his work and his ability to organize. So on some level, it's very similar, and I think we could still learn from that approach. Similarly, as I was listening to you, I was struggling to think of who anywhere in the world has anything together enough to be leading anybody anywhere at this point. So all of us should be, you know, only to say that all of us need to be in more dialogue with one another to figure out what is and is not working, and how we all can support one another in whatever effort we're engaged in. But I think, and I'll just stop here by saying that I think that in this, again, unfortunate but profound moment of disorganization politically, that all of the ideas that have ever been on the table, certainly that Malcolm struggled with, should be on the table now. And we should be revisiting our own personal relationships to whatever organizations that we're you know, engaged with or not. Because you know, Malcolm started in an organization and ended in an organization. And that's something I don't think enough of us, myself included, take seriously enough. And with that, I do want to say thank you, everybody. I really appreciate this gathering. I look forward to many more. Thanks for doing this.
So I just had the great pleasure and honor, like, being in Ghana. And when I was there, I heard more rap music over there than probably in the last 6 months when I was here in America. You know, I saw more the influence of urban America in the way I would have never imagined theirs, and I can only imagine in other countries. And the reason I bring that up, if it's relevant to the lack of development of a real revolutionary movement. I mean, the folks in Africa and other oppressed communities globally, they're looking internally in terms of urban America, Black colonies for direction. So again, if we get our shit together, we have the ability to influence folks, globally. And the beautiful thing is they already have the seeds, and it's just helping fertilize those seeds. And I think, and getting our shit together is being able to, unify a movement of that's dealing with food justice, that dealing with grassroots organizing, that's dealing with multitudes of the issues of tying them together and moving them away from this separation of like every man or every woman is on their own. And there's some serious contradictions, but I mean, contradiction can be addressed. I mean, I think fundamentally that one of the beautiful things about the Black Lives Matter movement, whether we agree or disagree, it allowed for the emergence of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters to find and develop their voice. It helped to bring to the forefront a patriarchy in relationship to our movement, addressing many of those contradictions that we're still resolving, and an opportunity to grow a movement. We have to take a moment to step back and see what the contradictions is internally. Even myself, and how great I may be or think I am. I'm still full of contradiction. I'm still growing like many of us. But how do we move off the island? And to Jared's point again, if we're saying we're fighting for liberation, but you're only an individual, well, again, I could tell you all about the great shit I did as an individual, but an individual ain't gonna lead us to liberation. Only collectively, and not to make this a individual thing around other folks, because we all could talk about people who full of shit, right? But let's do it in a way that's principled. And in terms of, like Malcolm, when Malcolm called out King, it wasn't about calling him out per se. It was putting heat to the pressure of the movement, of challenging him and challenging the ideas. And we don't have a space, because now there's one of the terrible words that exists in our community. Because if you challenge somebody, you just hating, or you just mad because if I was to challenge Jerry, like, well, you just mad because your book ain't good hot as his, right? That's what some people may say. And this is how we reduce the shit as if we in high school. And versus like, man, this shit is deeper than some popularity shit. This is about lives. This is about transformation. This is about revolution. And we need to know the seriousness of the movement to emerge, but also part of the contradiction, how self-care. I mean, like I brought up earlier on another talk about Malcolm at his house was firebombed. The next day, he flew to Detroit. In retrospect, we can say whatever, but let's learn from that. As a husband, as a father, was that the best decision to leave my family and go to Detroit? Could that speech be held off? And if was there strong enough men and women in the organization, even if I could make that best decision, to pull me to the side and help me accountable, say, no, Negro, go sit your ass down somewhere. The movement's not that important for you to leave. Even when Malcolm, when they knew the assassination on his life, he chose not to. That was his decision. And we know he was up under so much pressure. And we all know nobody can make best decisions up under pressure. So again, as an organization, we take that pressure off of individuals and put it on the organization to hopefully make best decisions.
Thank you. I don't want to, say you can't say anything else, Yusef, but since we're running out of time, I would like, if there's anything else that you want to conclude and leave us with, like, we've been talking a lot about the theory of Malcolm X, right? And some different forms of practice, and we're sort of ending on this note of we can't do it individually. We need to join organizations, right, that keep us accountable to ourselves and to others. So I don't know if there's any sort of parting word as you, sort of answer this question that you want to leave us with, so that, and I don't want you not to have the time to say one last thing that's burning, if you must.
I will quote my namesake, Bunchy Carter. Nigga, do something only if you spit.
Yes. Jonathan, Shaheen.
I would just say just organize. And if you don't feel comfortable in the organizations that exist, is try and create one, or at least try and create a network of people that you trust to build and develop with. Because like you said, we can't do it as individuals. You know, we need to depend upon each other collectively. And so organize in any way that, you know, you feel most comfortable with.
And just sort of adding to that, and is, maybe this is showing my age, but I think while social media organizing is important, at least my experience has been that every successful action that I have organized has been because of the relationships I have formed with people who then showed up to the action outside of social media. And I think this is where it takes time and it takes a lot of trust building, but it's necessary and it's needed. People are not going to show up and put their lives and other things on the line, or their safety or anything, if they don't trust you. So I think that relationship building is important.
Mm-hmm. Jared, did you want to say something?
I mean, I just largely agree. I didn't want to take up any more time. If folks had something else to say, I just again thank everybody for doing this. I mean, frankly, the more I look at what's going on around us and the more production comes out about people like Malcolm, the more I get worried that we're not doing enough to sustain the reality of people like Malcolm and the work and the ideas that they did. I mean, there is a very conscious effort. It's not just conspiracy theory. There's a conscious political effort to make sure to manage public opinion and in this way limit the ranges of thought and ideas and politics that we deal with. So efforts like this are really important. And I appreciate everybody for doing this. And for everybody for watching, all the people out there watching. I think this is fantastic.
Yes, thank you so much to all of you for this, what ended up being a lively conversation. And I know some of you are already in person, but to see the rest of you in person as soon as possible. And I think, we're not leaving necessarily with a full call to action, but I think we're all generally encouraging people to join an organization of some sort that has some revolutionary politics, right? I think we can all agree on that. Yes. And so, yeah, so I'm not sure we'll do another, maybe we will, but I thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you to all of our partners for helping us organize this event, which is really the idea of Jonathan, right, who had this vision for this talk. So I want to thank him for putting that seed in. And yes, and so please check us out at Community Movement Builders. I got to put in the plug here. We are attempting to really practice revolutionary politics, given all the lessons that we have learned, as Yusef has brought up. And we do have a community garden and several other survival programs / revolutionary politics programs. So check out our organization and look out for another one of these events. Hopefully we'll be able to put together. Right I don't know if Shamtoli can come back in. Yes, and join us. Thank you. Yes. The floor is yours, Shamtoli. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
So first of all, it's such a blessing to have a chance to sit back and actually listen to our conversations. So thank you, Dr. Prosper, for moderating.
Mamyrah, please.
Oh, well, listen, you earned that, doctor, so.
I did, but
I hear you, I hear
friend.
You. Yes. So I just want to, again, thank all the guests and the speakers. We are more than happy to facilitate a series of conversations. So LawAtTheMargins is here as a collaborative partner towards that. All the conversations have to kind of go back to movement building work. Our model is essentially media and narratives, but we're movement supported. So it's really important that we're not sort of part of the larger sort of philanthropic circle. So yeah, with that, there's not much else. This is going to be recorded. You can share it with your networks. If there are other organizations that want to host conversations, we're about co-creating radical narratives. So we're really an alternate media space, and we're member driven and member supported. So we're tiny, but we're fierce. And blessings and Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Peace.
Peace.